watching on the web as well. This is the first time we have streamed one of our meetings. This is a really good place to start. Lobbying the Ohio Legislature, learning how our government works. Probably a lot of times against us instead of for us. So that's why we're going to be in the halls there. We have a lot of different organizations and interests in Senate Bill 33. Nick will cover that a little bit, about a quick overview in a bit. But those organizations have come together realizing that this fight affects anybody who would dare to speak. And for those of us that believe in true grassroots democracy, citizen participation, work through nonprofit organizations, this is a direct threat, much less a slap in the face to our vision for our country and democracy. So we're all here in order to come together, make our demands known to our legislators, organize, show up, and do something. This meeting tonight is being hosted by Coshocton Environmental and Community Awareness. And we have 3 of our board members here today. Two of our board members couldn't come. And I'd just like to acknowledge Nick Teddy, Roberta Kettler, and I'm on the board too, Tim Kettler. And Coshocton Environmental and Community Awareness is working with a number of organizations, and we are fighting this bill. The Ohio Poor People's Campaign is co-hosting this event with us. They've done a considerable amount of organizing to bring together watch parties, to bring together their constituency, and mobilize them for some of the events that we're working on that's upcoming soon. I want to particularly thank Teresa Mills of Buckeye Environmental Network, Rick Sally, who will do a presentation this evening on how the legislature works, and it's an inside view from a man that knows and the man that will tell the truth. So right now, I want to introduce Mary Aguilera from the Ohio Poor People's Campaign. She'd like to welcome all of you out there who are watching this stream right now. She's going to take just a minute to talk about this organizing. And while Mary's coming up here, I want to thank UU Justice Ohio for doing this stream, but for a whole lot more on our work on SB 33. So if I will, Mary Ann Aguilera from the Ohio Poor People's Campaign.
Hi everyone, just want to thank
Mary.
CECA for hosting this event tonight. It's a perfect example of all the work that we need to be doing in the state of Ohio. The Ohio Poor People's Campaign National Call for Moral Revival is a revival of the original Poor People's Campaign from 1968. And it is like an umbrella for all the organizations that are working daily to fight all these issues that really are a culmination of all the attacks on our freedom and our democracy. So SB 38 is SB 33 is a perfect example of an issue that can bring all of us together, because it will affect us in our ability to just, have freedom of speech and say what is wrong with the attacks that are the policy violence that is constantly being put into place against the most marginalized in our communities. UJO is also one of our fiduciary sponsor, and they are hosting lots of watch parties across the state as well, and they've been immensely supportive in the Ohio Poor People's Campaign. So we hope that we can help serve as a connection to poverty, all the issues that affect us through poverty, racism, ecological devastation, or economy, what we call the corrupt moral narrative of religious nationalism. And so SB 38 really, that's it. That's everything right there. I keep saying 30, sorry, SB 33 is the perfect example of something that can bring us all together and fight all of those issues. So, thank you.
And it will be everybody's issue. If you dare to speak out about healthcare, if you dare to speak out for the environment, if you dare to speak out for the rights of poor people, for community rights, to have a say over what happens in their own community. If you dare to speak out about corporate personhood and money as free speech, then this bill, Senate Bill 33, is aimed directly at you. And it's aimed to intimidate you. And if you can't be intimidated, it will imprison you. And then it will attempt to intimidate for the next time. But I have a feeling that we won't be intimidated. I'd like to introduce Nick Teddy now. He's the board president of Coshocton Environmental and Community Awareness. Nick has done a lot of the legwork on this for us. Nick secured a grant from the Piper Foundation for us to fund educate your legislators, and that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to educate our legislators on September 19th at the Rice Book Center at our Capitol in Columbus.
Well, I am very privileged to be here in front of all of you on the internet with people who have chosen to try to work together on an issue I think that is of utmost importance, because when you put Senate Bill 33 together with some of the other anti-democratic policies that are going on in Ohio, gerrymandering, voter suppression, and now the attempt to stop us from speaking out and stopping us from disagreeing with their policies and their government intimidation, threats of bankruptcy, threats of prison. We're on a slope, but we're piecemeal by piecemeal having our democracy snatched away from us. And if you're a person who believes in change and believes in progress that doesn't involve putting profits as the benchmark of success, but actually helping people to realize their search for justice and their search for fulfillment in this life, then that is what we're after. And I'm starting to try to change the paradigm. We're going to start to work together and value those goals you have for humanity. We have our goals for the environment and for humankind, and you have yours. And I can't see how humanitarian values are exclusive at all. There is so much opportunity for us to work together. And if we can succeed in exposing the lies and deceit they have built their power on, they can't stand up to the truth. They have no moral base. You folks out there spent your lives trying to do the right thing. They have spent their lives trying to make money. And now, I think it's time for us to take the fight to them, to expose them for who they are, for what they've done, show their records, show who's funding them, show what their ultimate goals are. They're not job creators. Job creators don't send your jobs overseas. And you can't really blame the Black community who are being scapegoated, or the immigrants who are being scapegoated. This is all the problems that we're seeing today, from the environment to social justice, always at the feet of a small, greedy elite. And those people have got to be held accountable. And I'm hoping that tonight we can start to do that. I don't want to go into Senate Bill 33 too much, actually, because we have someone who can speak to that very well tonight, and who's going to Teresa Mills. But I want to encourage you, let's show up on the 19th of September at the State House and really tell these people where we stand. There are other voices in Ohio beside their corporate overlords. And we have to make them start paying. I listened to Rick give a lecture. One of the things that really resonated with me, Rick, Sally, our other speaker, one of the things that really resonated with me is he said, you've got to make your legislators know that they will pay a political price. And that's what I think, if we get there and start showing them that there is opposition to ALEC policies, to having our rights taken away, that is going to, in some measure, make them start to think about whether or not they're going to pay a political price. This is a good time to do it, because a lot of this is laid at the base of the Republican Party. There are plenty of Democrats who are complicit, but I think the Republicans are going to see in November people are a little sick of the value system that it's solved. I'm hopeful. Anyway, I want to turn this back to Tim, and he's going to discuss a few things that he's got on his mind.
Well, one of the lessons we've all learned, and I know everybody has been doing this for a long time, and we all have learned probably through our mistakes more successfully than some of our victories. But one thing we have learned is we can only beat Senate Bill 33 if we have numbers, if we have unity, if we have a clear vision for the future that we want for our children. And so to build numbers and unity, all you have to do is look around a little bit at some of the various meetings that probably a lot of folks go to. If it's for health care, or if it's for the rights of the impoverished, if it's to fight corporate personhood, you see a lot of those same folks there. Yet you might walk up to them at, say, a Move to Amend rally that is fighting corporate personhood and money as free speech. Move to Amend, to create the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. Well, when we think about healthcare and the fight of bringing healthcare to everyone, which is truly a human right, when we think about that, how are we going to do that if we don't get big pharma and insurance companies and money out of the fight? That's big pharma right there, call it right now. And what they're saying is, keep off of us because we have the legislators bought and paid. So we need Move to Amend to get health care. You can keep calling, we're not answering. Well, how are we going to stand up to oil and gas when they've created a loophole at the federal level that we can drive 100 Mack trucks and a division of Hummers? How do we fix that if we can't stop the corporate raiders? We need Move to Amend there too, though. And in spite of all this, our laws, we're not going to legislate climate change. Not in any way. We're going to live with some effects of climate change, and the sooner we can get smart, the easier it will be to do that. But that remains to be seen. But we will be living with the real brunt effects of climate change. And we all know the biggest recipients of damage and suffrage from climate change are going to be the poor of this country. They don't have mobility like most of us do. They have to stay where healthcare maybe can be delivered, at least in the inner cities. A lot of them are in low-lying areas. We've seen that horror show before, and we've got nowhere to change it. So we know that the environment's going to affect poor people. We know that the environment's going to affect us. And what are we going to do when the injection well creates a community-wide health crisis? And all of us will have to decide if we have coverage, can we pay the deductible, and frankly, will the hospital even see us if they're in the network? So all of this is tied together. We go through all the groups that we all belong to and the different things that we might be involved in, but it is one large ecosystem that we're living in, and it's come to our attention that if we build numbers, we build unity, and we have a clear vision, then all of this will come together and we can be successful. It's called, Joan, it's called intentional intersection. So seek out those people in those other groups. Bring them into this. We are all one. We're all smart enough to know we're experts on what we do know. And we know that we can work together. And we know that really everything we're doing is in the name of justice. So numbers, unity, a clear vision, and an opportunity to work together. We can win this. On September 19th, that's the next date. We'll talk about that. We'll be in Columbus. It'll be Educate Your Legislator Day. Be in the halls. Maybe it's Brighten Your Legislator Day. But wait, that's the next thing we're going to do. Tonight, we're going to get a lot of education. We're going to have some good discussion. We're going to get a feel from where we're going to go together from here. And the first part about that will be some education. Nick will open that up, wants to do an introduction for us. And so, Nick.
Okay, we are going to hear from our two main speakers tonight, and Teresa, are you going first? I got you down. Okay. Okay. All right. Teresa's going to speak on Senate Bill 33, and she's going to lay out for you some of the pitfalls that we may encounter, I think, trying to fight this bill, and she's going to maybe give us a guideline on how we can have some successes fighting this bill. But I'm just going to turn it over to her.
Let's see if I can get this back in here without blowing everything up. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to see so many different faces, familiar faces. We have Portage County here. We have Belmont County. We have the FACT group here. Who am I missing? Four people.
Spain, Ohio.
Yeah. Couldn't think of all of them. But I want you to know that this past Monday in Columbus, we had a meeting with a lot of different groups. We had about 20 people representing almost 15 different organizations. And these were not just environmental groups. This was the Poor People's Campaign. This was Organize Ohio. We came together, put our heads together to figure out how to fight Senate Bill 33. We only have one shot to fight the bill. It has already passed the Senate. It has had the speaker or the sponsor testimony, and it has had the proponent testimony. So when they come back, September the 18th, we will have one shot to get as many people in to testify. And we don't know when yet. It hasn't come up yet. But I'm hoping that we have enough people there. When it was introduced in 2018, we had over 124 people testify against the bill. So it was great, and I've been so proud of everyone coming together. And these are organizations that don't typically work together, but Monday we worked together very well, and I was so proud and happy of everyone that was there. And we came up with what we call a meme, and this is something that we will, hopefully that you will be seeing in the very near future a lot, and it's called Freedom Demands Action. So you will be seeing that. If you get any emails from me, you will see that on every email. Freedom Demands Action. You may also see, I have something here that I'm asking groups if the groups will support what we were doing. And by support, I mean either being at the State House, offering personal testimony, or at least giving us written testimony. So we're asking, okay, here it is. So on this form, it's a sign-on for groups. And this one says, freedom demands action, your action. Every person in this room, every one of your friends, every one of your neighbors needs to know about this bill. This is un-American, un-American. Senate Bill 33, I will read you this real quickly. 33 is frivolous and vindictive legislation. It is an outsider's bill looking for a problem, but will only create problems for citizens and property owners in Ohio. Please call your representative and ask him to vote no on 33. The bill is unnecessary. The legislation was drafted by the most powerful corporations in the United States with their own self-interest in mind. It is cookie cutter, one size fits all. It's been introduced in over 20 states and passed, I think, in 5. The legislation does not recognize Ohio's existing laws that prosecute anyone that trespasses on or damages infrastructure. The bill is an affront to Ohio citizens who respect private property. We already have the laws that they are seeking. What they're seeking is higher penalties. The bill violates the U.S. Constitution. The legislation was drafted in response to Standing Rock and landowner protests against large pipeline projects, something that has never occurred here in Ohio. It violates Ohioans' right to free speech, right to association, and labels these acts as crimes. What it's going to actually do is turn everyday law-abiding citizens into felons. The bill's language is vague. It could entrap landowners with infrastructure on their property and paves the way for industry to use eminent domain for pipelines and power lines, and to use language in this bill to claim landowners are impeding their commercial rights. The bill threatens and intimidates Ohio organizations with $100,000 fines. If they support protests at certain infrastructures or work with citizens exercising their free speech and association rights. Organizations could be held responsible for members whose actions they have not endorsed or can control. The bill violates the Ohio Constitution. The bill violates the one bill, one subject rule. The bill creates two separate and very distinct crimes: impeding critical infrastructure and critical infrastructure trespass. I also have, that's all very important, but I also have some talking points that I just added with the help of Reverend Joe. And this is very important. Senate Bill 33 criminalizes the ministry of justice-focused churches and faith-based justice organizations who engage in or support peaceful public protests at critical infrastructure sites. If a faith-based justice group or a church is found to be complicit with one of its if one of its members is found guilty of a felony intended to tamper or improperly tampering with a critical infrastructure facility, the church may face a $100,000 fine. That would destroy most churches and environmental organizations and the most faith-based organizations. A church may not assist a member in paying a fine in a civil action, which blocks a congregation from its religious duty to care for its members in times of distress and need. Citizens peacefully exercising their constitutional rights to assemble, constitutional rights should not be held accountable for the actions of others simply because they are in the presence of the same location. And what we're afraid of is, just like happened at Standing Rock, there were people who caused damage at Standing Rock that had absolutely nothing to do. They were, what's the word I'm looking for? Not interlopers. Provocateurs, yes, they were provocateurs. So, you know, if my group says CECA is going to hold a press rally or a protest, and someone from the injection well comes over and decides they want to cause trouble and get themselves arrested, CECA could also be fined $100,000. Same way with the church. If the church, if the church actually announces this protest, they could hit 5 or 6 different organizations with a $100,000 fine. Okay. So if any of you are with an organization, I apologize. And if you would consider signing on to this, all we're asking you to do is help us with testimony. So I will put these on the back. I have a few of our talking points, so you will be hearing some of these talking points from me, and I think it's really important that you hear what Rick has to say, so I'm done. My contact information? Sure. My email address, I have 2. I will give you the Ohio one. It is tmills@benohio.org. Okay. Oh, where'd that come from? Thanks, whoever just snuck it up here. I moved in the cord. Okay, Rick. Or whoever.
But I neglected to mention that Teresa is part of CAGJ. She's the organizer progressors, organizations, and she's also board member of BEN, and Buckeye Environmental Network. And our next speaker is Rick.
Actually, the executive director.
What's that?
I'm the executive director of the.
Oh, okay, Teresa has been promoted to executive director. And I can't think of a better person to do it. Rick Sally is a former OEPA director. And he at one time was director of the Ohio Environmental Council, the Ohio Environmental Council. And he's an attorney who's worked for decades litigating and defending environmental rights. So I would like to ask him to come up and give us some information on what's going on in the State House, and how it works, and what we can do to stop legislation that we feel is harmful.
Well, thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Rick.
I hope you can hear me through this machine. Okay. I confess I am an attorney. I've been one since 1980, and I've been in environmental law since 1983. That was the year some of you in this room may remember when the Democratic Party, of which 20% of them were working out, was in charge of every component of Ohio state government. Dick Celeste was governor, Anthony Celebrezzi was attorney general, and they were foolish enough to hire me as an assistant attorney general at that point. Because Tony was really committed to environmental enforcement. I went in, my first environmental experience was taking corporate officials individually, as well as the corporation itself, before grand jury for indictment for hazardous waste offenses. Yeah, Ohio used to do that. Now, it hasn't done it since, but we once did it and we can do it again. And I can tell you that because I was doing it. But I guess I messed up somehow. I got noticed in the front office. One day I got a phone call to come up to meet with Tony. He said he wanted me to become his legislative person, which I thought was kind of humorous. But Tony is not the kind of guy you say no to. So within a couple of weeks, I found myself in my first day at the legislature. It was an upper room in the Senate. It was during the home state savings and loan debacle. Some of you folks my age might remember that. But savings and loans were closing like crazy. And down in the rotunda was about, I'd say 4,000 depositors of home state, stomping their feet, screaming and yelling, until I saw the color drain out of every legislator's face in that room. And that was my first day at the legislature, and it taught me that there's one thing they really, really are afraid about, and that's you and me in real numbers, really pissed the hell off and not afraid to express it. Some of you may recall that from that organizing event, those home state depositors were made 100% whole by the Ohio General Assembly. So that was my first day. I wound up spending the next 10 years pretty much full time at the Ohio General Assembly. I did so for 3 more years for Tony. Then I went to the Ohio EPA, where I was appointed their chief counsel for 4 years. That was Dick Celeste's second term. And yeah, I had to do the legislative work there too. We got 8 bills written, drafted, and enacted into law. And I assure you, the Ohio EPA was not drafted a piece of legislation since then, since 1990. After that, I was at the Ohio Environmental Council for 4 years, still had to hang out at the legislature because the environmental movement just didn't have many warm bodies to head down there. I've been in private practice by myself since then, only working for citizens groups and a few local governments. I don't know if this qualifies me as an attorney still or not, but I've never yet taken a dollar from a corporation in my profession. But I have seen the legislature, and what I intend to now do, at least for around an hour, and then Teresa and I are going to sit here and answer your questions as long as you've got them. Just tell you what I learned about the legislature from the inside. So, welcome to the Ohio State House, where I say the Ohio Legislature is the dark heart of corporate governance in our state. A lot of folks think, well, maybe that's really the governor. Well, he's bad, but he's not as bad as the legislature. Maybe you think it's the judges. Well, they're pretty awful, but they're not as bad as the legislature. The legislature's been the dark heart since as long as I've been there. I was there when Vern Reif was speaker. He was speaker for over 20 years. Anyone recognize the name Vern Reif? Oh, that is so sad. Yes, he was speaker for like 20, 25 years when the Democrats were in the majority. His best friend was the chief lobbyist for the Ohio Coal Association. If you want to know why we are so under the thumb of the coal industry and their little minions like First Energy and all the other coal companies who are, well, really they're just electric generators hiding behind the coal industry, it dates to that time. And the subservience of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to the coal industry, the oil and gas industry, date back to that time. If tomorrow morning, the folks at Ohio EPA and ODNR would wake up, have a religious transformation, and suddenly decide they're going to go into work that day and do everything that citizens of Ohio believe they should do, it would get stopped within hours by the most junior of lobbyists going to the Ohio State House, to the committee chairman who runs the finance committee and controls the budgets of those agencies. There would be a phone call, and that religious transformation would be stopped dead in its tracks. Because the lobbyists don't bother with state agencies. They barely bother with the governor, but they sure know where their money gets paid, and that's at the legislature. So my next point, there are only two important things in Ohio politics. First is money. The second one, I can't remember. Oh, come on, that was a joke. But that wasn't my joke. That was the joke of United States Senator Mark Hanna, Republican from Cleveland, who said that in 1890, when he was the money man behind a certain other Republican named William McKinley. So this is nothing new. It dates back to that time at the latest. That money was the only important thing in Ohio politics. My last main point is, when you're thinking about the legislature, know this and base your strategies on this. At the legislature, the lobbyists and the corporations are a single combined mass. One large, pulsating, putrid entity that all intersects with itself. Now that sounds pretty depressing, but I call that reality. And I call that your starting point for strategizing, because we have got to be smart when we deal with the legislature. We don't get any errors. The other side can make 15 mistakes in their testimony and get away with it. If you have a word misspell, you might have that thrown right in your face by the committee chairman. You will not be given a break, but you can strategize work hard, get your friends in. This isn't something that can be done by 1, 2, or 10 people. This is something that can be done by 20, 50, 100 people working in unison and able to call on more people to get down there to that state house. I started with my home state example for a reason. And the reason was when that many people show up at the state house, that's when that congealed putrid mass that we call the Ohio political system in the legislature will respond to it. Not 1,000, but 10,000. Not one Saturday, but 10 consecutive Saturdays, if that's what it takes. I do not know anything else that's going to really make a difference down the line in these degraded times of ours. Sorry to be the heavy, but I've been there, I've seen it. So, Nick told you about ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Commission. Council, yes, thank you. They have drafted the model bill to Senate Bill 33. They've got maybe, 40 more environmental model bills out there that are current now. And they're going to keep pushing them through. And my next point is that it's much easier to play defense than it is to play offense in the legislature. Defending a bill is much easier than it is to get a bill passed. Because getting a bill passed takes a whole lot of money. And getting a bill stopped, well, that's kind of what the legislative process is designed to do. Because there's 14 separate steps to the legislative process that a bill has to go through. To kill a bill, you have to win one of those steps. And to pass a bill, you need to win them all. Or have a god-awful amount of money like percentage. So what are the 14 steps? And what points can we say about those? First is you have to have a bill introduced. That means you need a sponsor, and perhaps also co-sponsors who sign up on the bill. And that sponsor is the person who kind of like takes the bill all the way through. They give their introductory testimony. They organize the lobbying effort behind it. They're the key person. And the first vulnerability that someone like ALEC has is when they choose a sponsor. Because they get that sponsor, warts and all. Sorry, can you hear me okay? All right. So you need to find out who the sponsor is, and you need to find who their friends are and who their enemies are around the legislature. And some of the most important people in your coalition are going to be people who live in the legislative district of that sponsor. The legislature, of course, now we have term limits, which from my standpoint has been a disaster, because I used to work with some very long-standing legislators that have been there 20, 30 years. My God, they knew everything. This crop of people knows nothing, and they're just hanging out there for a while until they can get into the revolving door and get into the next level of the lobbying system. There used to be there so long, the folks were there so long, they made a lot of enemies, and that still happens. There was a bill that was up one day, and I had to be in one Senate committee when a House committee had an emergency vote on the bill. So I had to run across the State House to get to that committee. And fortunately, on the way, I ran into a legislator who I knew fairly well, who was a blood enemy of the sponsor of that bill. And he was going elsewhere, but I convinced him by simply telling him, hey, do you know what's his head's bill is going to be voted on and voted out of the committee you sit on in about 10 minutes? Well, his dislike for that person was so much, he dropped all he had to do, ran into that committee bill, through, and was the deciding vote against moving that bill forward. So that's why you have to know these sponsors. That's why you have to figure out who in the legislature might be an ally of yours. And it may be the last person in the world you would imagine. It may be the guy who lost 3 bills because of what that other guy had done to them. This is valuable stuff. This is the type of stuff that decides when bills move and when bills die. And you've got to somehow figure out a way to get in there and get that information, because it's gold once you have it. So after the bill's is introduced, it's then referred to a committee. You know, there's about 20 committees in both chambers. Well, there has to be a process that decides which of those committees the bill is actually sent to for committee hearings. Well, that's done by something called the Rules and Reference Committee. And the Rules and Reference Committee are all of the senior legislative leaders. Speaker of the House is on it, President of the Senate, all the senior leaders are on that committee. And they decide if that bill goes to a very friendly committee, or perhaps a committee that has members on it that aren't particularly inclined to be a doormat for the entity that's pushing this legislation. So the second most important person in your coalition is the members who are in the legislative district of people on the Reference and Rules Committee. If you're able to knock them out on their vote, that'll help a lot. Am I still having microphone issues? Okay. Well, how's that? Your eardrums intact? Barely?
You need to hear the message.
Okay. So you need a friend on that committee that you can work with. You know, there's members of both parties. Of course, the majority party has the majority number of seats. But a person on that Reference and Rules Committee is valuable because the bill's going to go there like 3 or 4 times before the process is done. And any step along the way, you can get it knocked out. So it's finally assigned to a committee, and then you have committee hearings. There's going to be a minimum of 3. First, the sponsor gets to go in and give the testimony. And that's probably been written by a lobbyist for the entity that's promoting the bill. And the sponsor can receive questions from members of the committee. So once it's referred to committee, you've got to figure out what? Who your friends might be on that committee. Which members of your coalition are in that legislator's district that may be able to develop a meaningful relationship with that legislator. And so they can ask questions. Because what you don't want is for the sponsor to give his industry written testimony and then receive no critical questions. And unless we're in the room talking to legislators, that's what's going to happen. And when that happens, immediately the signal goes out through all those odd chambers that channels that lobbyists use that this bill is going to be a cakewalk. When there's opposition, the other signal goes out, which is, oh my God, we're going to have to raise more money and send more money to these politicians if we're going to get this bill through. And you want that to happen. You want them to have to pay dearly for every step in this process. So after the sponsor's testimony, then there's the proponents, the people who are in favor of the bill. So this is the industry folks. And every industry group has their association. Every industry association has their lobbyists. And they're the ones who are going to write the testimony. They're the ones who are going to promote the testimony. They will bring in business people from the districts where the legislators on the committee are from, particularly the ones they think will be a problem. And they're going to have just this superficial gab fest about all the merits of this bill, not all of which is necessarily going to be remotely related to the truth. How do you deal with that? Again, you need a friend on that committee. You need to sit down with that person, brief them on the bill, get them ginned up enough on the situation so that when this testimony comes out, they can ask the critical questions. They can burst the bubble that the lobbying industry is trying to create on this bill. They could be the ones, say, on Senate Bill 33 asking, why are we making these small crimes as serious in criminal penalties as, you know, the following 15 nasty crimes: safe cracking, bank robbery, et cetera, et cetera. That's what Senate Bill 33 is equating it to. My God, a question like that really starts to make the other committee members turn their head. And again, the lobbyists figure, well, I guess we got to raise more cash again. Guess we've got to hit up our members out there to give us more money. And God knows they've been really complaining about it. And we're not even through the first chamber yet. That's how you begin to turn the tide. Finally, you have that glorious day when there's finally opponent testimony. Maybe the committee chairman always schedules these hearings. Hopefully they'll give you more than just a couple days notice. Don't count on it. You're gonna have to find out who the chairman is, find out who his staff is. You're gonna call them frequently to make sure you get as much advance notice as you possibly can. Well, if I start snoring up here, now that it's so dark, let me know. But I think I'm pretty much wide awake. I think I was talking about opponent hearings. So yes, you've got to know, and the best way to get it is right from the committee chairman's office when these hearings are going to be. You better write your testimony in advance so you can be there on a moment's notice and get as many folks as you can. That is one significant organizing chore, but it pays enormous dividends because you go in there, and yes, the industry folks will be asking you snarky questions. There's no doubt about that. You've just got to endure that and just keep coming back to your basic points about this. You know, I feel this chills the exercise of my First Amendment rights. I cannot imagine that simply to help the fossil fuel industry, we're going to jettison over 200 years of constitutional history in this country. I don't care what they ask you. That should be your answer. Something along those lines. It's what the other side's going to do. And then hopefully you have your friends on committee that have also been handed 5 additional questions that they can now ask you to help bring out your testimony more. That's how you make that hearing good. And that's how you force those lobbyists back out to hit up their board of directors to raise more money. So yes, these hearings are all held at the discretion of the chairman. Can be announced at any time. You've got to be on guard for that. And at the very final committee hearing, probably one after the opponent testimony, but it can be called almost any time by the chairman, there will be the opportunities for amendments. Now, an amendment needs to have its own sponsor and has to have a second. Someone has to second the motion to amend. You need 2 people to be able to raise it. And then once you're able to get an amendment recognized to be voted on, then there's discussion. And if you've got a friend on that committee who can lead that discussion, they can give an excellent educational speech about the nature of this bill. And also there's the idea too of the poison pill amendment. Who's heard of that one? The poison pill. Maybe it's not quite on point, but it's an amendment so nasty to the proponents of the bill that they'd rather have the bill die right then and there than have it go any further. For instance, let's say that Senate Bill 33, they're talking about trespass issues. You carve out a big fat exception for certain pipelines that are in a certain proximity to a house. And who's gonna wanna vote against that, right? You know, or its proximity to a church or a nursing home.
Or school.
Or even a school. Excellent idea. So who's gonna vote against school children and older folk in nursing homes? So just maybe, because they're now so confused, because there's been all this opposition, my God, that amendment goes in, and suddenly no one wants to pull it out because they have to vote against school children. And that bill just died right there on that simple strategy. I have seen that. I have done that. And you can too. Hearings are very important, particularly if the press finally arrives. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. These hearings are big press events, particularly opponent testimony. There's Ohio Public Radio, who are decent human beings who have to cover every one of those hearings. My God, just give them a chance to cover a juicy environmental hearing with a bunch of citizens going up to bat against the fossil fuel industry. They will be there and they will record every one of them and have it on the next morning statewide on public radio. Lots of newspapers, the same thing. Now, newspapers aren't as strong as they once were. Back in my day, I used a media strategy more than I did a political strategy. Because if you could convince newspapers to go against the bill, and they wrote about it, and they wrote editorials about it, that was the best and cheapest and most sane strategy I could find to defeat bad legislation that had been introduced, say, against the Ohio EPA when I did their legislative work. Media is not that strong now. We've all seen a lot of these bad bills from the legislature, ignominious House Bill 6, that I think every newspaper in the state editorialized against. And it still went through because the legislature didn't notice. Well, that's because of the modern press world. It's about the corporate press. I am just sad to the center of my being that the press has so little role anymore. But still get them there. It still generates buzz. It worries legislators. And once again, the lobbyists have to go back to their board and say, we need to now raise another $15,000 to get it out of committee. Invaluable. Make sure you have written testimony. Make sure it's got your big points and it's well supported. And you have to share it in advance with the committee chairman's office. And whoever's organizing your event should let you know you have to have your testimony done by this time and sent in to the chairman's office. Because all the testimony now is available online, or it should be, which is a valuable resource. If you don't have your testimony in there, you don't testify. So after it comes out of committee, where's it go? Wow, back to that pesky rules and reference committee, where all the legislative leaders are, and they make the decision whether it goes to the floor or not for a floor vote. So if you've gotten it through this far, and you've really wounded the other side badly enough, maybe the legislative leadership, who looks much more globally at the political wins than anyone else in the process at the committee level, maybe they'll decide this bill is just too darn hot. And if we're going to take it out at all, we're going to take it out right at the end of the session after the election. There's something called the lame duck session. So if you've got a friend on that Rules and Reference Committee who can promote that line of argument when they are meeting, and you've got your newspaper editorials, if that person can spread around to the other members, well, then one of two things are going to happen. They're not going to put the bill on the floor for a while, or the lobbyists will now have to raise $30,000 more from their board of directors, because this is legislative leadership. They're not nearly as cheap as the committee guys. So if it gets out of rules and reference, then it goes to the floor for a floor vote. Floor's not a whole lot, you know. Your friends should get up and testify against it. The other side's got to say nice things about it. How mom and apple pie will never be safe again if we don't pass this bill, and other deep philosophical observations. And of course, some of them will get very angry on the other side about those terrible people who have opposed this God-given bill. If you hear testimony like that, rest assured you've done your business properly, and you're properly set up for the next chamber. It will be press coverage, so be around for the floor vote to talk to the press about it so that you get some more quotes in. And have your friends testify, and your friends in the legislature will be more than happy to talk to the press afterwards as well. Then there's a vote, and then what happens? We start at the beginning again and go through all of those steps in the other chamber. So let's say it started in the House, it's now in the Senate. There will be, for every bill, a sponsor in the other chamber. Someone who the proponents of the bill have chosen to champion this bill for them and kind of be the spark plug, the go-to person. So figure out who that person is. Once again, figure out what their history is. Figure out who you have in your coalition, in their district. Figure out who hates their guts, because that person's now your best friend. One important thing about the second chamber, you need to get the bill amended. I don't care if it's to change 3 words in the bill, you need to have an amendment. Because if the bills aren't identical in the 2 chambers, that's when the other chamber has to have a whole new vote on the bill to decide whether or not to accept that change, which they often do, or whether to have something called a conference committee, which is right there. The conference committee happens if both of the chambers have different versions of the bill. There's 6 members, 2 from the majority party, 1 from the minority. Now, in one way, they're extremely dangerous, because if the industry guys got their people on that conference committee, which is likely because they're appointed by the Senate president and by the Speaker of the House, they can completely rewrite the bill. And all of the amendments you may have defeated in committee can get stuck right back in there. And it is very hard to lobby a conference committee. So this is like red flashing light terror time for people who are involved in that bill. But on the positive side, it's where a lot of bills go to die. It's become too controversial. It's not going to go anywhere, or maybe the other chamber would have agreed to it. So there's a conference committee. They say they're going to meet. They never really meet. The bill just dies there. It can be revived at any time. You've got to have some insiders, and that's what we'll talk about soon, to help you with that. The other big thing is conference committee means big politics. The little people get to see what the big people are doing. That attracts the media like bees are attracted to honey. So conference committees is your time to have a significant press offensive. So it comes out of conference committee. What happens then? It's back for the 3rd time, the rules and reference, to get put down to the floor for another vote. And then there's the floor vote on the conference committee report. Interestingly, no amendments on the conference committee report. It's an up or down vote. And then the governor has to sign the bill. He doesn't necessarily have to sign it. If he doesn't sign it, it still takes effect later on, automatically after the expiration of what, 14 days or so, 10 days. Or he can sign it and it becomes law. He can veto it, and then it goes back for a 2/3 majority vote process. Does nothing, it becomes law in 10 days. But you can lobby the governor if it's been hot enough, if the media asks him enough questions about this god-awful Senate Bill 33, and Governor DeWine, are you really going to jettison 230 years of First Amendment history in this country on behalf of the fossil fuel industry? What's Mike going to say to that? They've been following the bill the whole time. The governor's office has lots of legislative sharks on their staff who follow these things. They'll know what it is. You can try to bring pressure against it. Just don't miss that step. So that, my friends, is the legislative process. Two special dangers, though. Who knows what a substitute bill is? And who knows how my time's going? I think I got 20 minutes anyway. A substitute bill can happen in committee. It's when the bill can be completely rewritten. Every word changed. And someone can offer as an amendment a substitute bill. And if that is then seconded and gets a majority vote, then whatever was in the old bill gets thrown out, and you have an entirely new bill. Maybe it's one that's weaker because you've been effective. Maybe it's one that's terrifyingly more draconian. Regardless, if you ever hear about there's a substitute bill coming up, again, that's red flashing light time. Frequently, these are done simply because there needs to be a lot of changes to the bill, and there's kind of benign, but often they're done as a way to catapult it out of committee with a lot of nasty changes in it. And then the lame duck session. Who can ever forget the lame duck session if they've ever sat through one? After Election Day, the legislature normally meets about 2 weeks afterwards, before the convening of the next legislature in January. And all the bills that may have been stuck in Rules and Reference Committee, or even in Conference Committee, or sometimes even still in committee, can get blasted right through the process because, hey, they've got 2 years for the voters now to forget about this thing. And that, again, is a red flashing light danger point. You've got to have people around the legislature to be aware of what comes up on the voting agenda. You need to be talking to people, that's our next topic, who can tell you about that. But just because you've made it past the election doesn't mean you're home free yet. So that's the process. That's how you can utilize all those procedural steps to stop bills. But hey, how about some pointers? First, do give legislative leadership very close attention. They've got 4 or 5 main leaders: the speaker pro tem, the majority whip, etc. And there's also leaders on the other side in the other party. Now, of course, the Democratic Party. They control the whole process. Back when I was in the legislature, individual legislators had some heft. You could work with them, and they would then make sure leadership would pass the bill because, hey, they'd been there for 25 years. They had a lot of authority. They had a lot of favors backed up. That's not how it works now. These guys have been here 4 years. They don't know jack. They haven't made many friends or enemies. And that's why leadership now is massively more powerful than there used to be when I was in the legislature. Believe me, it's a very dangerous situation. It's not good, but it's what the era of money has brought us to. Legislative leadership are the first people that the lobbyists go to promote this bill. We talked about they're selecting a sponsor. Well, that normally happens when the lobbyists go to the leadership, the speaker or someone, and say, hey, we got this hot bill. I can raise a good chunk of money with it for you. Who can let me do you a favor by letting you select which member of your caucus needs something like this, so they can also be able to raise money, also elevate their profile. So you should try to meet with leadership, especially if you have members in the coalition who are in their district and may have set up some contacts with them. If you can convince leadership that they're being sold a bill of goods by the other side has sugarcoated what's a really dangerous thing politically to them, then you just killed that bill. Also, do realize that the lobbyists have been working on this for months and months before the bill's been introduced, lining up everything. And they may be able to take it right through their initial chamber very quickly. In which case you may have to have what I call the second chamber strategy. If the bill's introduced in the House and you know your resources and time is limited, and you start building up your stuff in the Senate right away. So that by the time it comes over there, you've got a bit of a head start going. That, my friends, is an excellent strategy. Do pay very close attention to the committee chairperson. He controls whether the bill ever gets voted on or not. He controls whether there's going to be amendments. He controls how many hearings there can be. He can say, hey, I'm going to have 5 opponent testimony hearings. That's within his authority. And it's just because he decides to do it. No one can second guess him. No one can overturn that. So they have power and it is absolute. And know that some chairs are far more powerful than others. A lot of them are totally controlled by the leadership. Some of them have more independence and are willing to do more things. You've got to find out these things about these people. Next point, cannot emphasize this enough. Treat legislators with a maximum, again, that word was maximum degree of respect. The easiest way to destroy your efforts to lobby against the bill is to go in and say, hey, you bastards are all corrupt. You don't care about real people. I'm going to make myself stand here and feel good with this testimony by saying how this system's really ugly and terrible. Okay, if you've listened so far, you know the system's ugly and terrible. That's not an effective strategy for how to give testimony or how to interact with these people. In fact, especially when you're testifying in committee, they will try to bait you into being the, quote, crazy environmentalist or whatever the lobbyist folks have been saying about the opponents of the bill for the last 6 months. Do not take the bait. Do not take the bait. Be respectful. Get them to respect you because you are being respectful to them and you didn't take the bait. And whoever just asked you that incredibly snarky question is now feeling like the ass that he or she probably should feel like all the time. If you lose your cool with the legislator, it's over. You have no point in ever going back to the legislature again. That will haunt you every time you walk in the door. And look, the next one, don't take the bait if they try to make you lose your cool. Now here's something really important, staff. Treat their staff respectfully. All the legislators have 1 or 2 important aides, they call them. The senators may have even more. Committee chairmen have even more than that. And these are extremely useful people. First of all, oftentimes they're nice people. And if you meet with them and say, hey, what's going on with this bill? They might give you some really useful insights because, wow, they know something this person wants to know. They're more than happy to share that with you. And there will be some progressive Democratic legislators out there who have progressive staff members who you should make alliances with quickly, who can tell you, well, the lobbyists for oil and gas was just here. They said this and this, that's their strategy. So I'm going to suggest that you rebut them by saying this and that. That information is only going to come to you from those staff people. Of course, there's some staff people who are jerks. The majority of them you will like to meet, and they are invaluable. Any strategy that doesn't involve networking with those folks, learning what they know, having them help you as much as they can, is a very foolish strategy. And find out all you can about your legislator. Your legislator has a role in this too. Make sure you get down like on the 19th and meet with that person. Talk with them about the bill. But don't just go and talk to them at the State House. One thing legislators do not respect is the person who shows up and says, vote this or vote that, and then disappears from their lives forever, especially if they're a person in their district. Those folks have fundraisers. They have coffees. They have meet and greets. And if you're on their Facebook page, you will sure have an invitation to all those events. Start to show up at them. When they see your face twice, they'll remember it. When they see your face 3 times, they'll definitely remember you. Engage them in pleasant conversation. Let them know that you're, around, you're paying attention. Hey, read that story you put in that miserable right-wing rag of the newspaper last week? Oh, it was a great story. I thought that was interesting. What do you think about this and that? That's how you get to have leverage with these folks. Doesn't have to cost you a lot. Columbus fundraisers, yeah, that's $250. Locally, $35, $25. If they only serving pizza, $15. Show up at those things. Those are a godsend to you. That's the way you build a worthwhile relationship. Because if you just show up in the committee and bitch at them, you're not going to have a relationship that you're going to find useful. Again, I'm going to repeat myself. Find out what you can about the bill sponsor and all the critical people. Again, find out who their enemies are if you can. The staff will tell you that. God, staffs love to gossip. They love to gossip about which legislator hates which one. Gold. You just can't use your time more efficiently than learning that stuff. Oops. Am I going the wrong direction? I am. My apologies. Okay. Also find out about the Legislative Ethics Committee. It's in the State House. They don't have a whole lot online, so you may have to actually go there in person. But what do they have? They have the financial disclosure forms. They have that golden information about who's gotten what money from where. That is just the type of thing that a friendly reporter likes to have, especially when you have it copied and handed to them. Yeah, there's loopholes. Yeah, a lot of it can get outside the system. Yeah, none of us would have wanted a system this leaky, but it's still very useful. And for some reason, people don't use it. It's a gold mine. It's just not being used. Not that I'm an advocate for mining of any kind. Be familiar with the Ohio Lobbying Center, Ohio Lobbying Activities Center. That's because that's where lobbyists and their employees have to file similar disclosures too. So find out who that lobbyist was who was talking in the ear of the committee member right before that committee member lobbed a couple hand grenades at you in committee. Ask that friendly staff member who's probably sitting in the back of the committee room, who was that person? Then go to the Ohio Lobbying Activities Center and find out who that person works for. And try to complete the circle on just what you're facing here and figure out the bigger picture. Oh yeah, here's a great one. Those of you who have fought Ohio EPA and God help us even ODNR, what is their first, second, third, fourth, fifth through 25th strategy in dealing with citizens? Hey, we're the experts. We know what we're doing. We're the experts. Even when they're probably violating their own regulations or statutes or exercising discretion in a way that is nonsensical, they love to hide behind that thought that they're the experts. That reflects itself in committee testimony about, well, we just had a PhD here, Dr. Smith, who has worked for Oil and Gas University for 35 years, has said he's the expert and he has said this. Well, don't let them get away with you with that. It's an old trick. Let them know that you have researched this situation thoroughly, that you have documented stuff, not from the crazy parts of the internet. No. That does not help you. Get the technical studies from universities, get the good studies out of the federal agencies. Used to have good stuff, God help us now. Have the good stuff. Next, don't trust a word that the bill's lobbyist might tell you. Once they know you're involved in opposing their gravy train on this bill, yes, they will come up to you to find out, first of all, who you are, how big a group you have, what your strategies are. You just don't respond to that stuff. Anything the bill's lobbyists or the industry people say, do not accept that as being truthful, no matter how big their smile might be. Next point. Some of you, I assume you've all got to this point already, don't trust all Democrats. There are decent progressive Democrats that I dearly love and who are just precious to all of us in that legislature. Find out who those 7 people are. There are good ones, you know, a lot of them from urban centers, but the rest of them are part of the lobbying game just as bad as the Republicans. So just because there's a D after their name, don't give them a pass. Don't have that friendly chat with them that the bill's lobbyists wanted to have with you. And that you were wise enough to say no to the bill's lobbyists. But you're now going to spill your guts to all of this stuff to a Democrat who's a Democrat in name only. I guess that would be a dino. Be mindful of all these folks. Check them out as much as you can. Boy, I'm kind of getting some nodding heads on the point. This is a reprise of an earlier point. Do make a special effort with Democratic staff. These are folks a lot like you and me. They're progressive. They really want to have a world that their grandchildren live in. They are the best source. If you've only got 10 minutes at the legislature, spend it with one of them. Figure out who your allies are on these bills. You know, that hideous House Bill 6, my God, the coal industry was, of course, on the other side, but the oil and gas industry was against the bill. Who'd have thunk that? You know, wow, they actually took a position that didn't involve death and dismemberment. There are strange bedfellows out there that you've got to figure out who they are, who you're playing into. If it's a significant industry group, they may have lobbyists. Those lobbyists can do all this background running around for you, figuring out what's going on, what your strategy could be, who to look out for, which Democrat is a dino on that bill, stuff like that. If you can do that, you have doubled, if not tripled, your power immediately. So do some creative thinking, think about it, and then they have an association, call them, call their executive director even, and say, hey, are you aware of this bill? This seems to really screw your membership over. And I wanted to know, and I wanted to share some information with you. That's the type of call that can have incredible benefits. Okay, what's my time here? Let's see, I'm counting 3 people still awake, 4? Maybe more? Okay, okay. It's just I realized myself that I'm a lawyer and I get pretty bored after a while. Okay, by my clock, I have 1 minute. So a few more quickly. Talk to the lobbyists you see in the committee room. These folks have been there to watch the bill you're interested in. And you can identify them as a lobbyist because they have a $5,000 suit on. Well, just mosey up against them and ask them what they're doing, what's happening. These folks like to talk. They know things, and they like to let other people know that they know things. So talk to those lobbyists. Again, that's a shortcut to getting some valuable information. Next, do not trust the lobbyists for state agencies. All the state agencies have legislative people, 1, 2, or 3 people. And they'll go in and say, hey, you know, I'm working for this agency. You seem like a nice person. And what about this? What about that? Do not trust them. Those are the most political people in the state agencies. If they're doing lobbying for state agencies because they're building a resume of practical experience so that they can translate that into big time, big money lobbying, they will mislead you. There may be exceptions, but they're going to have to prove it to you before you should accept it. Be extremely suspicious of the state lobbyist who comes to you bearing strange gifts. Talk to newspapers really often. We talked about that. Talk to the newspapers, the editorial staff. You know, you can just call your local paper and say, hey, I'd like to come in and meet with your editors on ideas for an editorial. And they will frequently say, sure, come in. We can give you a half hour next Thursday. Make that call and then keep that appointment. Yeah, look for poison pills. We talked about that earlier. That's the amendment you get in the bill that is so toxic for the other side. They want their own bill to be defeated. And this, I think I touched on too. Look for chances to help your legislator. You know, if you're around the state house and you get some interesting information while talking to one of those other lobbyists that just asks to be there and loves to talk, well, go to your legislator and say, hey, I just heard this. You know that? That's valuable. You've done that person a favor. You now have a link with that legislator. Go to that $15 coffee. When they have an event where they're taking questions from people and you ask them a smart, respectful question about 3 times in a 6-month period, they will feel a link and they're happy now to have you at their events. That stuff pays dividends. Oh yeah, and then the last one, I think, or second to last one. Realize that effectiveness means a significant commitment of time and people. You probably got the gist of what I'm saying is that it's no wonder lobbying is a full-time job because of all these nuances that go into it. No one person can do it. It will drive you crazy if you try. We've got to get groups and coalitions together. And we've got to split it up in this group will work on media and try to get editorials. This group's just going to do the research. They're going to find that great study from the University of North Dakota from 1987 that absolutely explodes the technical arguments being made from the other side. Or can talk to the engineering professor at their local university and actually get that person ginned up enough that they write some expert type testimony for hearing. And who knows, maybe they'll even come down and give that testimony themselves. Nothing impresses the legislature more when a professor or an expert comes before them. You see them straighten their backs up, you know, and they want to be on their very best behavior. Those people are persuasive. Find them if you can. Also have, the people who are gonna make constant contact with the committee chairman's office about when the hearing's gonna be, who make sure that every other week, the Democratic staff person who's so nice and so helpful gets a phone call and you ask them to update what's going on. Too much for one person, too much for 10. 25 people can handle it. Build a strategy that considers the legislative calendar. The legislature is in session for 2 years. At the end of that 2-year period, even if a bill only has one final vote to go, if it isn't enacted and sent to the governor, it's dead. And it has to start over again at the start of the next legislative session in January. So keep that legislative calendar in mind. They've been gone the whole month of August. They traditionally do that. So know that, wow, August we can plan on doing our own research work and networking stuff. We're not going to have to be back on the legislative calendar and being aware of the danger of them being in session until the second week of September or something. Know that calendar. It's pretty much laid out. Again, the staff can tell you these things. So lay out that year-long calendar and figure out this is a danger point. We've got to make sure folks are ready here. Thank God there's August. We can actually live our lives again for a while. And other times when they're planning recesses. So do yourself a good favor if you know that. How to talk to legislators. Well, again, always be respectful without fail. Hold on to your frustrations until the ride home. Interstate 71 is there so you can scream all the way. Just hold it in until you get there. Let them know, approach them from this standpoint. Communicate this to them as subtly as you can. If you really want to help them make the right decision on a complicated, challenging topic, believe me, all environmental issues are challenging topics to these folks. And that you realize they're vulnerable because they've only heard from one side, and that side has self-interest. So, hi, I'm here because I'm worried about this bill. I've heard what the industry's been saying. And I think you're getting sold a bill of goods. God, if I had $1 for every time I heard that phrase at the legislature, we would all be in a much better place than generally where we find ourselves. It would be all on me. Let them know you're there because you trust them to make the right decision if they're given the right information. Approach them that way. You're going to open up a channel of communication. Always, always be totally honest. Take no shortcuts with the truth. The first time they think you've misled them or given them bad information is the last time they talk to you. And if they're an industry honcho, like most of the legislators are, they're just dying for environmentalists to make that simple mistake and then blow it out of proportion. Be careful. Make no errors to the extent you're capable. If you don't know the answer to something, say, I don't know. That's a great question. I will research it and I will get back to you on that because I can see that's an important thing. Thank you for bringing that idea to my attention. That's important. That's a really good answer for you to give. And then make sure you get back to them. Write them a letter. Don't email. Write them a letter. Have the information. Have some support for it. That'll gain their respect. Yeah, I think that's probably enough for now. I don't want to overdo it, but hey, I want to thank you all. The legislature is important. Democracy is important. Lord knows we're learning that lesson. about 6 times a day, particularly this last week. We can get it back one day. We can do that. It's going to take a lot of effort. We've just got to hold the line. We've got to have an effective rear guard. We've got to start killing these ALEC bills and let ALEC know that Ohio is a bad investment for them. Hopefully these ideas have stimulated some thinking. There are things that have worked for me. A lot of them are things that work consistently. And my friends, I hope that was helpful. God bless.
Well, thank you, Rick. We're going to we can take a little bit of break, about 10 minutes or so. Come back. Welcome back to everybody that's watching this on the web. Well, right now, we can have a conversation with all of us here, as well as you folks out there that might be watching this streaming video. You can send a question to Mary Aguilera, who will be Facebook Live at Ohio Poor People's Campaign on Facebook. If you're streaming the link and would like to chat with Joan with a question, why, please send it in and we'll have Rick or Teresa answer it. So right now, let's have a discussion. And questions are always good. And that spurs a little more discussion. So Rick and Teresa will talk a little more and we'll take some questions. I'll come out there with the mic. If somebody would like to ask a question, we'll give you the mic. So go ahead, Teresa and Rick. Do you folks, are we finished up with presentation? Did you get a few comments during our break to talk about?
Let's get questions.
Okay, I'm asking, I got a question for you. You talk a lot about, get in there and talk to these people and find out which ones you got to know, which ones are going to give you the information or listen to you and help you. Is there a list I can get those names off of? How do I know who's the right person for me to talk to? Red button.
Hello. Now, hello. I would start off on the website for the legislature. I would start with your state representative and your state senator. I would check them out. I would get on their Facebook pages so you know where their events are. Once you've gotten your research done with the bill, I would call their aide and I would ask them if they know what the legislator's position is, that you have concerns about it. And if it's a personal phone call, that is the most effective way to communicate with these folks, without a doubt. People who sign internet petitions and think they've accomplished something have fooled themselves, because those have no impact. Emails are helpful, handwritten letters are also helpful, phone calls are best. So I would start there, build a relationship with that person so you have someone with eyes and ears following the committee schedule. Follow up, send them some information that, hey, I've got some articles from the Washington Post or the New York Times or something that talks about ALEC has been promoting these bills across the country, et cetera, and they may find that useful. They may not read it right away, but they'll put it in the file that they have on Senate Bill 33. When it comes to a floor vote, they'll have it right there to go to and refer to, along with notes from your phone conversation. So how was that for an answer?
Very helpful.
You can also go to the benohio.org website, And we have all of the members of the House and the Senate and the Public Utilities Committee listed on our webpage, along with their first and second aides, their names, so you can, it's right there, the email addresses and phone numbers, everything. So check out the webpage. Yeah, I've done the work for you. It's just ben.ohio.org. Or no dot between Ben and Ohio. It's benohio.org.
Well, I have a question, Rick. Even though you may have a fairly good working relationship with the legislator, they get to know you, they know probably how you're going to come at them, let's say. Not secret strategy, however, they know where you stand, and it seems like it gets a little difficult to even get an appointment with the office. Sometimes I sense that our representative avoids us. So what is a good path for following up to get an appointment to actually speak to an aide or anyone in the office?
I think without a doubt, individuals have a difficult time working with any legislator, particularly if that individual is asking the legislator to vote or in any way act against the people who are funding that legislator's campaign. No doubt about that. How you overcome that is that you can't let them think of you as just an individual who has come in this one day and can be forgotten. These legislative matters are campaigns, they're movements. Only with the appearance and hopefully the reality of it being a movement of many people keeping many eyes on the legislature will they begin to be responsive. And if they feel some heft being exercised by citizens, they start to see the newspaper stories, perhaps quoting yourself, always very good to improve your cachet on that point. And if they know there's a movement out there that might actually hurt them, then they'll think twice about not letting you come in and at least giving you the courtesy of contact. So without a movement, we're not going to be successful at the legislature. With a movement, things start to move.
Let me touch on that just once. I like to be the person that when a legislator walks out of a committee room, I'm right there in his face. So he cannot avoid you in the halls of the city, of the State House. And another place is to be the entrance to the parking garage. You can capture the legislators there, which we did. Senator Hoagland, who sponsored 33, and we got him so frustrated that he turned around and went, well. So you have the right to be in any legislator space you want. You can still be polite, but you know, they can't avoid you in the halls of the State House.
I was just curious. I noticed you were talking about people needed to treat the legislators respectfully, which I totally can understand. I worked with court for 20 years myself, and that's just a basic premise. But what I wondered about is if you had like your community OEPA meetings and people got frustrated and some of the legislatures were there and they felt that that frustration was aimed at them, is it possible to clear that slate, or is that kind of contaminated? future work, I guess.
I don't think it's ever, forever contaminated. You know, I think sometimes if you can bring a third party into it, someone that maybe the representative or the senator respects, or another representative, and say, look, I think we got off to the wrong foot. Can we start over? Let's rewind. And so I don't think it's ever off the table.
I concur with that, particularly at a EPA public meeting. I mean, I've never been the one where passions didn't start to grow. And the more the agency speaks, the more the passions grow. I think legislators are aware of that, particularly, actually, for the most part, from both parties. Man, you think we enjoy cracking on bureaucrats? Those folks are really expert at it. So in a way, it's almost like you share something with them. But if they themselves felt like they got involved, I would still attempt to get with them. If you have to say anything about the meeting, I would structure it along the lines of, it was so good to see you out of the context of that superheated EPA meeting. I know you seemed frustrated, I was frustrated. It's so nice we can just sit here and talk about this now. I think something like that clears the air a lot. And again, if you're part of a movement, they're going to give you time.
We have a question from one of our folk online. And Justin asks, if I wanted to have a legislator introduce environmental legislation in the State House, whom could I contact to help draft that legislation? Are there any free legal resources or persons that would work pro bono to help write it?
Well, hi, Justin. There's actually an answer to that you'll like. If you can find a sponsor, and that would be, I think about my own legislator, if that person is not suitable to promote environmental legislation, then there's a dozen or so legislators, sadly almost all of them at this time would be Democrats, who would be willing to put forward environmental ideas. Now there is a body of attorneys hired by the legislature called the Joint Legislative Commission, Legislative Service Commission. Thank you. They have a bunch of attorneys. Those attorneys are assigned to every committee. They sit right beside the committee chairman. They should be authoritative in the subject matter of the legislation, so that's why the chairperson often consults with them. But once a bill has a sponsor, the sponsor can give the legislative idea to the Legislative Service Commission, and then free of charge to you, that body will draft legislation. Even if you draft your own legislation, the Legislative Service Commission will then redraft it before it can be put into bill form and actually introduced in the legislature. So find a sponsor, give them your idea, try to be as clear as you can, but you don't have to reduce it to statutory language. They'll decide if you can get there by amending an existing statute, or you need to write a completely new section of the Ohio Revised Code. But they're a decent reference, and I used them a lot back when I was at the legislature. They're pretty decent human beings to a person. I really like all the members of that group. But that's not a universal sentiment.
Kim here has a question for you guys too.
I'm with the Cleveland Environmental Action Network, CLEAN. And I have a question when you are testifying in person in committee. I've done it twice. The first time I just read from my written testimony, but then I was told that you don't have to just read your written testimony. This is your opportunity in person to kind of go off script and add to it. And so I did that the second time I testified, but I ended up getting very emotional. I'm wondering if that helps or hurts the cause. And if it does hurt everybody here, it's a cautionary tale.
I think there's nothing wrong with emotion. I think if you were at the hearing when Carolyn Harding, bless her heart, stood before all the members of the committee and shamed every one of them. Now, that's not what we necessarily do, but I think emotion's not a dirty word. And that is true, you don't have to stick to your script, but please remember that any point that you want to make, if you do not read on script, it is not considered testimony because it is not written anywhere. So several times I have had to contact the legislature because some of our written comments have not been posted. Were you one of them? It was someone from Cleveland that I had to fight with the legislators to get their testimony posted. Maybe it was, I can't remember who it was now, but yeah. Be as emotional as you want.
And can I ask a follow-up, Rick, after you go through is, those comments, if they're not submitted in advance within, with the prior notice rule, then if you go off script ad lib, that doesn't get written into the record as your submitted comments would.
That is correct. And you're required to have written testimony ahead of time. That's the only permanent record. But that also means if it's already in your written testimony, it's there. So it exists, it's part of the record, whether or not you read it or not. My suggestion for people testifying is it's really important to look at the legislators. People who just read their testimony are not effective advocates. Folks who look them in the eye and take clues from them. They might see who the friendly legislators are, the folks who are nodding their heads, giving them encouragement, and then those other ones who just turn more and more into a dark cloud as while you're testifying. It's good to know that. I really think that eye-to-eye contact is valuable. People who are nodding and supporting you, hey, if you can, walk up to them afterwards and just thank them. But I was really nervous, and the fact that you seem so supportive was important. And that opens up a 3-minute conversation that's might be valuable to you. So yeah, your written testimony is already there. Embellish it as you want. I agree with Teresa. There's nothing wrong with emotion. I mean, everyone knows that lobbyists are fake. We shouldn't be fake too.
Yes, I know that everything is done like on a state level as far as the legislators or whatever, and that there are some friendly legislators, but there may be some that are unfriendly. Have you ever went over their heads and grassrooted on a national level, like talking to the senators and the congressmen? And I say this because I was a grassrooter, and when we were trying to ban the box, we had to go to the national level and and talk to Ron Portman and John Boehner and them, to get the power to be up there, be aware of the things that are going on. So is that sometimes feasible to maybe go to Washington and grassroots in that area?
Well, if you can, but I know when I speak of lobbying the Ohio Legislature, that probably seems to several of you, oh my God, that seems like a whole lot of work. DC is that amount of work times some huge number on top of that. Although, of course, there's a lot of good advocacy groups that take our viewpoints there. So that balances it out a little bit. Well, as long as Mitch McConnell's in the Senate, I just don't know how far that, anything that's useful to human beings like us is going to get there.
That's how you really feel, Rick.
I'll,
Not biased.
I'll respectfully decline the opportunity. But the federal legislators, like, there's not much point in having Sherrod Brown send in a letter on a state bill. Those folks feel that this is their own little world. So I would suggest you focus in that little world, that incredible tight space at Broad and High in Columbus, where the State House is, and probably the federal stuff really isn't going to get you much traction for the amount of time it would take to get into it. Much better to spend it on your local legislator or that committee chairman.
Rick, Nick has a question here for you.
Well, here you go, Jim. Don't do that to me.
Well, I did that intentionally to wake everybody up. And what I would ask you is, when we talk about movements and we talk about organizations, that there's several organizations here. We have member roles. We have certain roles that we may or may not be nonprofits. But a movement is, let's define movement a little bit, because I have a movement in mind myself that is a loose organization of organizations that are creating change. And there's not a membership role. This is organic change that happens, and that movement's the Poor People's Campaign. It's a true movement. So let's talk a little bit about how organizations just come together that build a movement.
Yeah, when I spoke to movements, it's when the legislative leaders see they're just not getting letters from Dayton on this topic, that they're getting letters from all over the state, from Toledo, from Cincinnati, from Steubenville. So they're hearing it from all around. That's when leadership begins to take notice. And again, leadership, particularly in these political times, is pretty much the whole legislative shebang. Those folks rule so much, no one has any seniority to challenge them. So when they get the sense that this is something across all geographic areas, that's the first thing. Second thing is when they get information, not just from environmental groups, but from churches, saying, I'm worried about Senate Bill 33. From the ACLU, of course, they would be very disturbed to see the criminal law being distorted for this purpose. So now they have lawyers writing to them. It's all those different types of diverse sources that the people at the top, and also the committee chairman is, of course, equally an important target. They begin to figure out that there is something really underway here. And that's when now they start to figure out, I better talk to these individuals I've been snubbing before, because there's something going on that I don't want to get on the wrong side of. So I talked about an organization before where you've got the group that does research, and the group that does media outreach, and the group that tries to stay in touch with the State House, and the group that organizes with people to prepare testimony. I look at that being a rather ad hoc group that pulls from all those different diverse forces of people who are concerned about the issue and want to just collaborate and do it. And from someone who's had the joy of working with citizens groups, having some victories, having tough losses, and things, nothing builds friendship like a common fight. And we should always seek those opportunities to find like-minded people and accomplish things with them. So that's my sense of the movement.
That's a good point for this group, is to seek like-minded people.
Right. My very first environmental issue was the Columbus trash burning power plant. I got the nickname housewife from hell, because I was always in someone's face. I had one legislator say to me, Teresa, you've got to be the most tenacious person I've ever met. Well, I didn't know what the word tenacious meant. So I didn't know if he had complimented me or insulted me. So my response to him was, you think? So I did go home and I looked it up, and it was a compliment. So, but another person's face that I was in all the time was Rick. So we worked together on the Columbus Trash Burning Power Plant. We closed it. It was torn down. It was the largest dioxin releaser in the country. And I went on to become Rick's grassroots coordinator. So
I hired her
yeah,
right
he
after.
hired me. He's put up with me ever since. That's going on 30 years. So I want everybody to think about, and this is the way I look at the movement. I think of a tree. I think of the earth and the tree coming out of the earth. Okay, and a tree has branches, and the branches are all of the different movements. It's the Poor People's Campaign is a branch. You know, the Ohio Organize Ohio is a branch. The Buckeye Environmental Network is a branch. The Sierra Club is a branch. And those are all the branches of the tree. And in order to be strong, the base of the tree needs to be strong. And that is all of us. That is all of us holding up these branches. We need to come together. We're not different. You know, it's just because I work on environmental issues, that doesn't mean that I don't think that the Poor People's Campaign is important, because it's just important as my issue. And I saw that as we came together on Monday. It was wonderful just to see the like-minded people in the room come together. So that's my opinion. But we had Randy and Sandy had a question.
We have one online.
Okay, we have one online. Once environmental legislation is introduced, what is the best strategy, briefly, to get it passed aside from having advocacy and interest groups write their representatives and letters to the editor of newspapers? So they're asking kind of like a nutshell. Strategy in a nutshell.
Well, I'm going to start off with assuming that we're not talking about dumping $250,000 into the speaker's re-election fund. So that's the way most of the industry folks do it, but I'm assuming that's not proper. You've got to find a good sponsor. Hopefully that sponsor is on leadership. The House Majority Whip, the House Minority Whip, someone who's able to, just by their signing on to a bill, add 20 additional legislators on your side. Here's a hypothetical. If the governor endorses it, that really helps. Don't know how to go about doing that right now. But that is the type of shortcut that's really effective. But if you have a sponsor who you can convince, you know, to feel passionate about it, who's willing to go to bat for you, there's nothing more important than that.
There's nothing more important than that, but there is also no shortcuts. So if you think that you want to write an environmental legislation, count on 2 years. It's going to take you 2 years.
Okay, I have another question from Randy.
2 questions. First one is, when you go to give testimony, is there a limit? And the second one is, when you're giving testimony, like I'm a scientist, so I like to always cite peer-reviewed journal articles, but I'm also passionate about it. So should you combine both components, or should you, stick, if you're scientists, to peer-reviewed studies to back up your opinions, or should you let your, personal stories come into play?
Yes, thank you. First, about time limits. The chairman sets time limits. Teresa mentioned when there were 100+ people who testified on last session's version, were they given, what, 3 minutes each? Or?
They say 3 minutes, but they didn't hold us to it.
So there may be time limits, and that's set by the committee chairman. Normally, there aren't limits, but at a whim, and the chairman is I'm certain that word comes from some language's equivalent of autocrat. That person just establishes things, and that's why connections and hopefully cooperation with the chairman is just gold in legislation. The second thing is, yes, do use the expertise you have, use the expert stuff. At least the high points of it, you can attach copies of the full report to your testimony. Certainly you can give the URL to where it's available on the internet, make that available. Nothing impresses us legislators more than doctors and professors and people with technical backgrounds. Use that. I wouldn't put all of my weight on the expert stuff, but just hit them with 5 or 6 bullet points about the breadth of research that's available of high quality that supports your position, and include footnotes, references to it in your testimony. I would suggest that that's an extremely important thing, but again, don't keep it dry. It's not like we're lawyers for the chemical industry. We're human beings, and we need to be able to bring these things right into the hearts of those legislators, which may be a hypothetical as well.
Hard, okay. Go ahead.
In regards to the original wording in Senate Bill 33 versus the current language, what was taken out and what replaced it? What's in the current bill?
The bill that died in lame duck session in the 132nd Assembly, when it came out in the 133rd, was almost word for word the same. Okay. The ACLU said that they testified against the bill. We were informed that the sponsor contacted the ACLU and asked them to remove 2 words, impede and inhibit. And in doing so, the chair of the committee took that as a sign that the ACLU would no longer oppose the bill. So it wasn't that the ACLU did not oppose the bill, it just did not become as much as a priority as something like the heartbeat bill, and that. They did take out the drone language where they had made it illegal to fly a drone over a critical infrastructure. They did change some of the fines and some of the, at one time, trespass, they tried to make a first-degree felony. So, so those types of things they were minor changes, but I don't want to say they made the bill better, because nothing can make the bill better. It just needs to die, kill the bill. And she's got a question.
Well, we got one right here.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Logan Brocious of the Ohio Health Registry. In fact, if we are talking about the Senate Bill 33, we're also referencing essentially street protests, physical demonstrations that would be policeable, et cetera. It would be, et cetera. So can you emphasize the need for unity between those street protesters and those people that are interfacing with the State House? And how important that is.
This bill lists 73 different, I don't want to call them entities, but 73 different things that are considered critical infrastructure, like a telephone pole. So it's going to be very hard for anyone to know where they can actually protest. And that's one of the parts that makes it vague, makes the law vague, so that makes it unconstitutional. But here's our thinking. Where is the one place that we know we can go and testify? Go to your legislator's home and testify. And you can say, I'm here because you made me come here. Okay? We actually, I don't know if Rick remembers this or not, but we actually protested at Governor DeWine's office, or not office, at his home when we were working on a cement kiln that burned hazardous waste. So we were all prepared, we were loaded for bear, and we get to his farm and pull into his farm field, and I'll be darned if he didn't meet us at the door and invite us all in for hot chocolate and cookies. We didn't go in, but the point is, if we can't protest anywhere, we can protest at our legislators' homes. And I'm willing to do it.
Yeah, I have good things to say about DeWine. They were good cookies.
Good cookies.
Teresa, couldn't they just come and arrest you here for trespassing?
Couldn't they arrest him for trespassing?
They could have. We were on his property. In fact, I actually made it into his house. About 4 or 5 of us did. The cement kiln was maybe 12 miles away at most. And he was pretty gracious, and I don't think he knew much about the cement kiln, so it was a productive exchange. However, it was his property. It was not posted, do not trespass. But he had the ability to say we should not stay on his property. But hey, it was cordial. It never got close to that.
I wasn't invited. Well, I guess I'm just wondering because talking about being arrested for, you're talking about being arrested for protesting in certain specific areas. I would think that if you went to one of their homes, that would be the first place they want to arrest you.
The newspaper story that comes out, protesters arrested at insistence of local legislator, is something they do not want to read. Take advantage of that.
And what makes their home critical infrastructure? Well, it might be in their homes.
But it's not one of the 173 statutorily designated things that's necessary for criminal conviction. And Teresa makes a good point. If we can't run the risk of our protest accidentally being within range of a cell tower, not to our knowledge, that has all types of questions for just where is the safe zone left for people to freely speak. And that sound I think we're hearing is Jefferson spitting in his coffin.
Just recently, we went to Rob Portman's home right after the shootings, and we did a die-in right in front of his driveway. And his wife came out and spoke with us and was very cordial and was very, said, well, he's not here. So said, well, we'll be back. And we went through the motions of doing the die-in, even though we had talked with her. And there was a police car sitting right there at the end of the driveway. They knew we were coming. But it felt good. It felt good. And it, I like, news was there, media was there. And it served, and we were respectful, and we, went through the motions, and, and kind of built morale, it just kind of made us feel good, if anything. So.
Yeah, so one thing you can count on with a politician is whatever happens, whatever occurs, their first thought is, how will this look in the press? That's their first through fifth thought. It's going to be right along those lines, and it pretty much ends at that point for them.
So my question was, it's kind of, I'm coming at from a different kind of subject, but I'm just curious on your thoughts about voter suppression. Like, voter suppression is such a huge issue right now, and how does that play into all of these issues? Like, if it, I'm working with the legislators, and just, are there any things that we need to think about, and especially right now in Ohio with the purging and all that kind of thing? How do you suggest we kind of go about kind of attacking that as well?
But let me touch on one thing. When you talk about doing the die-in, congratulations. I love it. We used to, everyone applauds. I think that's great. We used to do a lot of stuff like that years and years and 30 years ago. We would protest at the State House. We actually built a mock cemetery on the State House. Yeah. And it was, we had tombstones that we built. And we put RID, rested dioxin, and we named names. We actually put an APB out on the mayor of Columbus because he was missing. So we need, and we always call it guerrilla theater. We need more guerrilla theater. We used to protest at the State House. We would have the chicken from the Buckeye Egg Farm. We would have people dressed as chicken. We would have the Grim Reaper. We had talking outhouses. We'd go, people walk by the outhouse and go, hey, come, did you know? So that's something that you could do with the voter suppression. But all of this, and here is, Rick and I were involved a year and a half, 2 years ago with the United Nations Human Rights Tribunals. And we had 2 tribunals here in Ohio. We took those on, Rick took them on to Oregon for us. We charged the state of Ohio as being in violation of human rights related to fracking. Okay. So my thinking is, if Senate Bill 33 passes, that we do a human rights tribunal and charge every one of our legislators with violating human rights, and take that, hand deliver it to New York. That's voter suppression, that's the heartbeat bill, it's everything. Because they are taking, I don't want to say they're taking away your voice, we've given it away. Because we're not at the State House, we're not in their face every day. Yes, for years and years and years, I avoided the State House because it would physically make me ill. And I have been at the State House when we did the Senate Bill 11, House Bill 11, the drilling in the parks bill, where they wanted to drill in the parks. We were there till 3 o'clock in the morning, giving testimony. And it was so powerful. This work is hard, it's dirty work, it's nasty work. And to do the guerrilla theater just gives you, it makes you just a little bit lighter. It really does, it just gives you more power.
Yeah, it brings energy back to you. We all know things that drain us. We have to also be mindful of the things that replenish us. I just had to mention the factory farm rally at the State House. We spent a lot of the 90s organizing on the factory farm issues. I think the paper said 6,000. I think the number was really 3,000 people from around the state we had at the State House one Saturday. And we had tractors that had driven all the way down from Marion County to the State House. And they drove around the State House for hours and hours. And we had a huge rally, and everyone from the Buckeye Egg Farm area, Agri General, if that strikes some bells, brought their fly strips with flies and were walking up and down High Street, frankly, halfway through downtown. Talk about replenishing your energy. We were lit up for months after that, ready to keep that fight going. But to echo Teresa, it's not happening anymore. It's not happening. We have conceded the field, and we've got to get back out there. I also want to remark too, voter suppression. Who's profiting from that? Corporations. Fracking. Who's profiting from that? Fracking. Corporations. Who wrote Senate Bill 33? Corporations. We know where the oppression is coming from. We know it's just us left to resist it. We've got candidates now finally in this country putting their finger on that issue. I wrote my first article in the Ohio Environmental Council newsletter in 1992 about corporate power, all about how since the East India Company in the 1600s began to corrupt commerce in the Indian subcontinent, we have had this fight. So we are all together. We don't have the freedom to be our separate little fights. I don't have the freedom to be merely an environmentalist anymore. I don't. The stakes have gone beyond that. The stakes were well beyond that even before we demanded the purchase agreement.
Okay.
So we've got to unify in the years we have left.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, one thing I just want to say, keep standing, I just want to say very quickly that we have allowed our legislators to become too comfortable, and we need to make them uncomfortable any way we can.
Well said.
First of all, I thank you for tonight. It was helpful to go through this process, because we forget the whole process sometimes. Well, thank you for putting this together. And unfortunately, it's too late in the game to ask if everyone introduce themselves. It's late, so I don't know exactly who everyone is. I'm Neil Pizzul, and I'm the outgoing president of the FACT board. I want to take a little tangent question here. We've talked about how to approach our legislatures. Do you have any thoughts on how we approach people to become legislatures so that we can move the comedians on?
I thought that's what we're doing tonight.
Oh, yeah, are you signing up?
No, I'm not.
I
have a T-shirt that says "Kneel for kindness."
Okay.
I wish I had a better answer. I can tell you what I've been doing lately. The judiciary is really bad in Ohio now. I'm not feeling much fulfillment from the legal side of things. It's like what I said, yes, there's an election. I'm working locally in my community in Columbus. I'm working with a local Democratic club, and we have had we're in a suburb for the first time since the 90s. We now have Democrats challenging the Republican-dominated city council in every position, also city attorney. And I'm working with my friends in these groups, and we meet monthly, and I'm finding that experience was very good at recruiting local candidates. We now have a majority on the school board, and today's school board member is next election's state senate candidate. That's my own personal experience. That's what I would suggest. And we make our legislators come and talk to our group. And we charm them, and we go to their events, and we show up. And it was our district that elected a Democrat over a Larry Householder selected Republican that now broke the Republicans' veto-proof majority in the House. 19th district, baby.
One more question.
Hi, as some of you know, I'm Gwen Fisher and Damon Ray and I represent the Portage Community Rights Group. And I'm so grateful that you had this meeting, and I absolutely think that groups using different strategies need to be aware of what each other are doing, need to work together and find ways to help each other. Our strategy is to try to change the actual legal structure by, we're working right now in Portage on a county charter that would secure our right to say no. Now, obviously, we know we're getting pushback, but some of you may have heard about the Toledo Lake Erie Bill of Rights, and that they're part of our network, and we're fighting to secure rights, equal rights for everybody, and the right for us to say what happens in our communities. And I think, just as we came here to find out, how you're operating and what kinds of things you do, I hope, if anybody would like our contact information, I'm happy to give that to you. And I think we need to know what each other is doing. And I'm reminded of a story that gets told of some campers who were hiking and came to a river, and they were just resting, and then suddenly one of them noticed that there was a baby in the river. Yeah. And they jumped in and saved the baby, and then pretty soon somebody said, "Oh, there's another baby in the river." They jumped in, and that kept happening. There were more and more babies in the river. And finally one person got out and said, "I'm going to hike upriver and find out who's throwing the babies in the river and stop them." So we need to save babies in the river. And Senate Bill 33 is an attack on all of us, for absolutely certain. But we also do need to hike upriver and find out who's throwing the babies in the river, and try to change the legal structure. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for pulling this all together. It's so, so important.
Okay, we got to take a little moment here because we have some tools for us to use, and we don't want to go away without knowing what we have at hand.
Yeah, we have put some tools up on our website to make our Educated Legislator Day more effective. So if you go to www.CECAware.org and look for these tools, registration. If you would like us to arrange a meeting with your legislator, just go to the registration frame, and you'll see a little button there. Just click that, and it will bring up your Educated Legislator Day form, and it will ask for your information, and we will get you in the process of trying to get a meeting with the educator you want to see. Okay, back. For letter writing, we need letters. The Ohio Senate will return to the State House on September 17th. We need letters by that date into the State House and to the legislators. Mailing addresses. Go ahead and click that. Okay, this is the Public Utilities Commission. members that will be testifying before. And you can see there that they all have an address that you can mail to. Back. Other contact info. These are their phone numbers. This is something Teresa gave me. They have their emails and also their legislative aides. So you can, if you call them, you can ask for the legislative aide, or when they identify themselves and about who they're talking to, who you're talking to. You can also email feedback. And, oops. This isn't working. You go scroll down. Keep going down. Okay. Up, or I mean, yeah, right there, yeah. Click that button to see talking points and ideas for your messages. And you can see that there are a number of things that give you ideas for letters, ideas for testimony, and feel free to use those as sort of takeoff points from what you're doing. Okay, so I just wanted to make you aware of that. www.seekaware.org, and we need those letters. We need letters to the legislature before we testify. Thank you.
Okay, last word go to Teresa. Send us out the door. Send us out the door with a mission.
We need you. We need everyone in this room, and we need your neighbors, and we need your brothers, and we need your sisters, and we need your mothers and fathers. So get with it. Get with us. I agree with Gwen. We all need to be working together. I do want to leave you with one thing. I just received some very damning information out of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources on brine. They always tell us that brine spreading from conventional wells is not a problem. ODNR tested 118 wells for radium-226 and 228, and they are coming back as high as almost 10,000 picocuries per liter. And that's the stuff that's being spread on our roads in the winter. This is radioactive waste. Huh? Is it high?
What does it mean?
What does it mean? Radium-226 is, your bone recognizes it as calcium, so it's a bone seeker. It will give you cancer. We need to stop this. I plan, I will be retiring soon, but this is the last thing I'm going to do in the environmental movement. And by golly, I am going to try my best to get brine stopped spreading in the state of Ohio. That's going to be my swan song out of the environmental movement. I will. Right. I'm going to do it.
And we'll be there with you. We definitely will, especially for a small community, for people who are from Coshocton.
There were 4 wells tested in Coshocton County.
And every township spreads brine. They all have a resolution. We know the miles and miles and miles of dirt roads we have, much less the fact that it's not just a dust suppressant, it's a nice smell.
Just think about, you've got all those tanks sitting right across the road.
Yeah, everything is right across the road.
It's all radioactive. I mean, come on, sitting next to 2 schools, you've got all of these tanks sitting right across the road.
And for
radioactive waste.
And for local people, we are contending with the injection well issue. We have not put that to any less priority by any means. Senate Bill 33 came along. They played around with it long enough to give us a month window to prepare for Senate Bill 33 before they come back into session, or if they're in session, before they come back from vacation. So we thought it was absolutely important. We just had to take up this fight right now. But Coshocton Environmental and Community Awareness will be beginning a citizen first responder training and effort. And I think that we will make Buckeye Bryan wish OEPA was doing their oversight instead of us. Because we will have every record monitored. We have friends in the neighborhood that will allow us the use of their property to monitor the trucks in and out of there 24 hours a day if we choose. And we will comb every record and every inspection report. This is the way we can stop that. But it's a bigger illustration of what we all do as a group together and the progress that we're going to make. We are the movement in each separate expert field that we're working in, but we are the movement, and it's happening. So thanks everybody. I want to thank our co-sponsor, the Ohio Poor People's Campaign, Universal UU Justice Ohio for providing the stream and organization as well. FACT, Buckeye Environmental Network, CHEJ, CECA, SPAN Ohio, we're all partners. We're all doing something different, but we're all doing the same work. We're seeking change with a vision for our children in the future. That's what we're doing. Numbers, unity, and a clear vision. So with that, good night, and thanks everyone.